Освободительное движение Союза Советских Социалистических Республик.
Council of Ministers of the USSR State Committee on the State of Emergency. Dated on the 8th of May 2023. To Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary Council of the United Nations, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, His Excellency Csaba Károlyi. Note: by the right of the sovereign, on the basis of the rules of international law, proclaiming the inherent rights of all peoples, on the basis of the Charter of the United Nations, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Clans, Tribes, and Nations, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as the Vienna Declaration and Program of Actions, as specified in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and in other international, recognized legal acts, confirming the fundamental importance of the right of self-determination for all clans, tribes, and nations, by virtue of which they may freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Relying on the right of the great, united, Soviet and sovereign people living on the territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, we remind you that the United Nations plays an important role and consistent role in protecting the rights of indigenous clans and tribes of all nations throughout the world, is obliged to consider and take due account of customs, traditions, norms, and legal system of the great, united, sovereign and Soviet people living on the territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as well as international human rights. By the right of the sovereign, on the basis of international law and sovereign legislation of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, we hereby declare: the United Nations Organization, established with financial resources of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the Founder General of the United Nations about the fact of our legitimate, sovereign rights to self-determination and development, to our inalienable Soviet rights without any discrimination, to enjoy all the rights of the sovereign, Soviet man, to the observance of our collective rights, as the great, sovereign people, victor on their sovereign country. We, the Military People's Council of the USSR, as the Council of Defense of the USSR, being the legal successor of the legislative, judicial, executive, and financial power of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Information Bulletin of the First Congress of Citizens of the USSR dated December 29, 1991, Resolution of the First Congress of Citizens of the USSR, Number 1, dated December 30, 1991, Mandate of Trust of the First Congress of Citizens of the USSR to the UN and the international community of all countries of the world, Number 1/2 dated December 30, 1991, Resolution of the First Congress of Citizens of the USSR, Number 1/3 dated December 30, 1991, on the basis of the current martial law in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, working under the jurisdiction of wartime USSR legislation, and under the jurisdiction of the Composition Special Meeting of the Special Presence of Military Tribunal of the USSR, the Supreme Court of the USSR, as well as the resolutions. Resolution of the Congress People's Deputies of the USSR dated December 24, 1999, number 1851I, on holding a referendum of the USSR on the issue of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, hereinafter Resolution number 1856. Resolution of the USSR Supreme Soviet Union dated March 19, 1991, number 2031I, on information on the referendum of the USSR held on March 17, 1991. Resolution of the USSR Supreme Soviet dated March 21, 1991, number 2041I, on the results of the USSR referendum on March 17, 1991. Resolution of the Congress of People's Deputies of the USSR dated December 24, 1990, number 1853I, on the preservation of the USSR as a renewed federation of equal sovereign republics. Resolution of the Congress of People's Deputies of the USSR dated December 24, 1990, number 1854I, on the name of the Soviet state. Law of the USSR dated December 1st, 1978, number 8497-9, on citizenship of the USSR. Resolution of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR dated December 1st, 1978, number 8498-9, on the enactment of the law of the USSR, on citizenship of the USSR. Sovereign Global Legal Act of the USSR number AZ01 dated March 10, 2023. Sovereign Decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR number PVK 33 dated March 23, 2023, on the re-registration and reorganization of the state company Russian Federation, Russia. Sovereign Decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR number PVK 35 dated April 24, 2023, on expanding the powers of the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The activities and work of the State Committee for the State of Emergency for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were assumed as a state military and political body of the Special Presence Conference with expanded powers in the sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. We also remind you that the Council of Europe has established ties with the Supreme Council of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in connection with which, since 1989, it has granted its status of a specifically invited guest, which legally passes the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, most purposes having the opportunity to conduct a constructive dialogue and interaction with the countries of Europe. The State Committee for the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics as a state military and political body of the Special Presence Meeting with expanded powers in the sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the supreme state authority of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the basis of the decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, number PVK 33, dated on March 23rd, and the laws of the wartime, observing the norms of international law, interacts and cooperates with the countries of Europe, with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, 1995. In accordance with the final act of the Conference of the Security and Cooperation in Europe, 1975, hereinafter OSCE, and interstate agreements of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the international, military, political, economic, and humanitarian field through the OSCE, 1973, the Paris Charter for the New Europe, 1990, and through the Moscow Third, the final meeting of the Conference on the Human Dimension of the OSCE, 1999, which adopted a document concerning human rights, fundamental freedoms, democracy, and the rules of international laws. We remind you that the commitments in the field of the human dimension do not belong exclusively to the international affairs of the OSCE member states, on the basis of which the statements and promulgated acts that the charters, conventions, and other international treaties of the Council of the Europe refer to have ceased to be valid for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics do not carry and have no legal force and legal consequences. In the view of the above statutory jurisdictions, trading companies and corporate trusts existing as a subsidiary within the New World Order Trust, 1943-2016, were required to conduct an annual audit, reconciliation, and inventory of the payment, trade, settlement, currency, and other balances as participants in clearing settlements using clearing currencies introduced by the USSR, the State Bank of the USSR, the Bank of the USSR, as well as the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance and the banks of the Soviet Socialist System, using the transferable ruble and its gold banking on the balance sheet of the institutions of the State Bank of the USSR, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, through the balance sheets and accounting for the Socialist Republics as a part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the trade balance, to manage the assets and property of the Union and Republican International Consumer Cooperative, as well as to create joint stock companies and enterprises under the law of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, using posthumous and lifetime funds of Soviet descendants, faces in straight line. The above-mentioned Soviet descendants and persons in direct descending line, by the Sovereign Global Legal Act of the USSR of the Sovereign International Treasury Monetary 1, number AZ01, dated March 10, 2023, redeem their living and dead inventory into property and personal possession from trust of the Russian Federation and the worldwide criminal, pseudo-state of the Jesuits in order so that the dignity and piety of their clans as freeborn sovereign Soviet citizens and people, as subjects of lifelong uninterrupted Russian law, as freeborn men and women, who are citizens of the USSR, be unconditionally not condemned and inviolable, as exercising the people's power of the Soviet, realizing the heavenly will on earth and throughout the world. In connection with the criminal activity of non-fulfillment of the obligations by statutory jurisdictions, trading companies, and corporate trusts existing as auxiliary within the New World Order Trust, 1943-2016, Sovereign International Treasury Monetary One as the owner and chief regulator of the entire world financial system and all world assets, issued Decree No. 25, dated January 13, 2023, which imposed the complete ban on any legal capacity and any actions of the so-called under-the-skis trusts, false trusts, and announced that all financial values and any other assets are subject to transfer to the balance of the Sovereign International Treasury Monetary One for further distribution to the development of the world according to the divine law of creation. In this regard, the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the state military and political body of the special composition of the Special Presence Conference with expanded powers in the sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the supreme state authority of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the basis of the decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, number PVK 33, dated March 23, 2023, as the laws of wartime, submitted an application to the Sovereign International Treasury Monetary One for the return of all the assets of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and sovereign citizens of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to the State Treasury of the USSR, as well as to consider the possibility of paying compensation to citizens of the USSR for damage caused as a result of the criminal seizure by international terrorists of the sovereign territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the great Soviet people. On behalf of the State Soviet power, the State Committee of the State of Emergency of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the state military and political body of the Special Presence Conference with expanded powers in the sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics as the supreme state authority of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the basis of the decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, number PVK 33, dated March 23, 2023, as the laws of the wartime, councils and non-legal acts and norms of civil legislation in the Russian Federation, Russia, and does not recognize corporate, fictitious citizenship of the company Russian Federation, Russia, previously foreign and currently state, as well as we do not recognize corporate, fictitious citizens of the Russian Federation, Russia, as subjects of their ownership, with the exception of sovereign Soviet citizens of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. In this connection, in the RSFSR, Russia, the provisions and norms of the Civil Code of the RSFSR are renewed as the official text with changes of the July 1, 1950, in order of the succession of the decrees of the Soviet power, which are controlled, provided, and supervised by the supreme body of the State Soviet power, represented by the State Committee on the State of Emergency of the USSR as the state military, political body of the special composition of the Special Presence Conference with expanded powers in the sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, operating under the jurisdiction of the Soviet legislation of the USSR in wartime and under the jurisdiction of the composition of the Special Presence Conference of the Military Tribunal of the USSR, of the Supreme Court of the USSR. Chairman of the State Emergency Committee, Satushev, Commissioner of the State Emergency Committee, Chernomorov, Secretary of the State Emergency Committee, Gorbachev. Application: Sovereign Global Legal Act of the USSR, number AZ-01, dated March 10, 2023. Sovereign Decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, number PVK 33, dated March 23, 2023. Sovereign Decree of the Presidium of the Military People's Council of the USSR, number PVK 35, dated April 24, 2023. Resolution of the Sovereign International Treasury Monetary One, number 25, dated January 13, 2023. Om.
Народно-освободительное движение Союза Советских Социалистических Республик.